I'd like to give a shout out to my third daughter, as today's her birthday, so happy birthday. As you can see, I pulled up Antinomianism, Wikipedia. In some Christian belief systems, antinomian is one who takes the principle of salvation by faith and divine grace to the point of asserting that the, sa- the saved are not bound to follow the moral law contained in the Ten Commandments. And so this is actually a heckle of Baptists. You can just say, I'm against Baptists, so I'm going to bring forward a definition that addresses why I'm against Baptists. And in fact, not even bring it forward of being against, just as part of the definition. The word has an anti, so there is something against. Here it says antinomianism was coined by Martin Luther. Really, it was one guy that was his collaborator that Martin Luther is responding to. But the collaborator was taking definitions too far and putting words in Martin Luther's mouth, let's say, and he had to respond to it. And the response was largely by way of soteriology, which is the differences in denominational beliefs. And it's fine to have definitions that are differentiated, but it's not fine to break out the anti-belief and start pointing fingers at the other denomination and trying to lift your own self up by tearing the other one down. And to a certain extent, I believe that that's what anti is. The anti is against the next person. It's not the only understanding to what anti is, because really it's also trying to address how to address the biblical law and process it through the difference of good works versus mercy, and how faith plays a role in that. And of course, that largely brings forward Paul, but also it brings forward John Wesley trying to support his position that he's not antinomianism, and in fact, Luther is not either, even though there are others that will point him out and name him as he's antinomianism. And then Luther has to defend himself and say, I'm not antinomianism. And that's a uniqueness to this word that I didn't realize existed when I commented in my last video. But over here, I pulled up Britannica and, of course, antinomianism to point out that over here, the heckle goes toward Martin Luther and Paul, as it's that group that has the notion of obedience as legalistic. And the good life is to follow the Holy Spirit. And so heckle them. Is it a heckle? And then to attach the evangelical movement to antinomianism is still name calling. The evangelical group would say, excuse me, let me define my own self as compared to you point fingers at me. And so this is a unique word and unique study to find differences rightly defined instead of biasly defined would go toward soteriology instead of let's find out how to point fingers at the other group over here instead. I've turned to Theopedia to see how they contribute to the definition, and generally they first clarify that it's something of a continuum. Antinomianism may be viewed as the polar opposite of legalism. The notion that obedience to a code of religious law is necessary for salvation. In this sense, both antinomianism and legalism are considered errant extremes, or in other words, you're erring on both of you are erring to bring such extremes forward, meaning that it's somewhere in the continuum of the middle of these two on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And thus, by them, it's that an antinomian is usually a charge leveled by one group against an opposing group, which of course is the same as saying heckle the other person, let's lift ourselves up by pointing fingers at the other. There are meaningful beliefs to be determined your own self as you deal with how much faith and good works and mercy play a role in your salvation, and not only salvation but sanctification and your walk, the walk of a Christian. These are. It's not that that you're meant to do away with all these considerations. It's more like make the determination for yourself while looking at such as soteriology instead of antinomianism as your guide. Simply put, the Lutheran churches label antinomianism as heresy. As clarified here, the Methodist churches that was founded by John Wesley considers antinomianism to be heresy also. This is to essentially clarify that denominations leave the commandments in place, and from their process the role of works and grace and teachings of Paul.